we'll get the presentation started. We are recording this, and this will be available to view on our website for those who may have wanted to attend this session but weren't able to. Can always go back and view it online. So somebody give me a thumbs up that you're able to see my opening screen. Thank you. Very good. So let's move on. Let's talk about how this meeting will go. We'll narrate the slides in the beginning of the meeting. If you've got comments or questions that come to you as we go through the slides, please enter them in the chat feature of Zoom. And our team will try to respond to your questions and comments in live time as we're able to. And at the end of the presentation, if we haven't been able to get to all of your comments or questions, we will go back and we'll try to pick up and answer them at the end of the slides. What I'd like everybody to do, so that you're comfortable using the chat feature, and also so we know who everybody is right now, we'll just stop here for a couple of minutes. And I just ask that all of you who are in the room go into the chat feature, which you should find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and just put in your name. And then if you're here representing a firm or a neighborhood or an organization, feel free to add that as well. So just so that we know who's here and where you're from. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes while people find their chat button and have a chance to do that. Thank you. Sorry, Faith. I don't know where dinner is either.
Faith, if we could figure out how to get food through the screen, we'd definitely be winning. So we have to figure that one out.
Virtual dinner.
Virtual dinner, yes.
Okay. Let's get into the rest of our presentation. So the purpose of this evening's meeting is to review the organization of the new UDO zoning districts to help understand the relationship between place types and zoning districts, and to explain what happens to our current zoning districts after the UDO is adopted. Before we get into the kind of the meat of the presentation, I want to go over what our schedule looks like as of now. We released the first draft of the UDO in October. We're currently in the midst of our public engagement session, which is a public engagement period, I should say, which is a period of time between when we released in October and this coming January, where we're collecting comments from the community and questions. We're having meetings. We've had several in-person meetings, and we're now going into these virtual meetings. So we are collecting comments through January, and then in March, we are going to take the comments that we've received on the first draft and incorporate them as appropriate into a second draft, which we'll release in March. The second draft of the UDO will be a red line version so that everyone will be able to see exactly what has been changed from the first draft to the second draft. Then we'll have a second public engagement period, a little bit shorter, March to April, where we'll collect your feedback on the second draft. Those comments will be incorporated into yet a third draft, which we are calling the public hearing draft. That is the draft that will go to a city council public hearing, which will be held in June. It will also go to our planning committee of our planning commission, who will make a recommendation on that. And then finally, a fourth draft, which we are calling the adoption draft, will incorporate all of the changes that have been made to that point. And that is the version of the UDO that will go to the city council for a vote. And currently our schedule shows that happening in July of this coming year of 2022. So the UDO is a collection of development regulations that currently reside in different chapters of the city of Charlotte, the code of the city of Charlotte. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see what those regulations are that are going into our UDO. The zoning ordinance is the one that a lot of people are most familiar with, and it's also the one that takes up most of the pages of the UDO. But we also have these other land development regulations that are in various chapters, and subdivision, trees, streets and sidewalks. You can read the list. They're all going into one place, into the Unified Development Ordinance. This is the primary regulatory tool for the city to implement the vision that has been established for the community through the adopted Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, something that I'm sure you're all familiar with. But what you may not quite get, and a lot of people have a hard time kind of figuring out what the difference is between the comprehensive plan and the UDO and place types and how everything all fits together. We hope that through this slide that we're currently showing you that we can make this a little bit clearer. The elements that are on the left side of the screen are policies. They're not, they're visions. They're written in the language of, aspirational, if you will. This is what we want for our city. This is what we want for different parts of our city. The elements on the right side of the slide are regulations, legal requirements. That's the UDO. So let's start at the top here. On the left-hand side of the screen, we've got our adopted Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. It sets the vision for the city. On the right-hand side is our Unified Development Ordinance. These are the rules that implement the vision. This is the law. And going down to the next line, we have place types, which are currently being mapped out through our policy mapping process. These contain different recommendations for different types of places in our city. And they include a number of general principles on what these kinds of different places in the city should be. The zoning districts, which are part of the UDO, establish the rules for implementing those principles that are in the place types. So, and then finally, to just use a place type as an example so that we can have a real life example of how this all fits together. Our example is the innovation mixed use place type. That is one of the place types that are currently being mapped out in the policy mapping. So the innovation mixed use place type says a lot of things, but here are a couple of examples of what it says. It talks about building height. So it says newer office, residential, and mixed use buildings typically have heights up to 6 stories in this place type. So it uses language like typically. It doesn't say must have or must be. It's aspirational, it's a policy, it's a recommendation. The UDO, the zoning on the right-hand side, will set the rules to get to that policy. So if the policy says heights up to 6 stories, the zoning says for the innovation mixed use zoning district, minimum building height 24 feet, maximum building height 80 feet. So these are the rules for getting that policy, heights up to 6 stories. The next one on the left, new buildings are designed with active ground floor uses to support a vibrant pedestrian environment. They have tall ground floors and a high degree of transparency using clear glass windows and doors. Again, written as a policy. The rules on the right-hand side, well, how do we get the tall ground floors? Our zoning requirement is a minimum ground floor height of 12 feet for residential, 16 feet for non-residential. How do we get the high degree of transparency? The zoning will require minimum ground floor transparency percentages. So as you can see, the concepts and the place types on the left-hand side are implemented through the zoning, which is part of the UDO on the right. So hope that helps you understand a little bit about the policy versus regulation, which I know can be a little confusing. So why are we developing the Unified Development Ordinance? Well, as I said before, it's the primary regulatory tool to implement the comp plan policies. We also think it will create more predictability for future development. It has a better set of standards. This will align all of our various development regulations so that hopefully they work better together. We say seamlessly. We hope they do work seamlessly together. They don't always do that today. We're also updating the requirements in all of those various development regulations to reflect what today's best practices are in the industry. We're consolidating all of these regulations into a single place, making it hopefully easier to find what you need to know in order to develop your site. We think that the UDO will be more user-friendly than our current ordinances are, with simpler terms, common definitions of terms, common language, more graphics. And lastly, we are now in compliance. We will be in compliance with the new North Carolina 160D legislation, which regulates planning in the state of North Carolina. So the UDO has various sections, and we'll just kind of go over what those are. It has an introductory section, introductory provisions, a zoning section, which takes up a good part of the UDO. Subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure is a different section, as is stormwater and natural resources. And finally, we have a UDO administration section, which also includes rules for nonconformities and how we enforce the regulations of the UDO. The zoning, well, let me first say that the UDO is further organized into 13 different parts, and each of those 13 parts contains one or more articles. So the zoning section of the UDO begins in part 2, and you can see on the screen, this is what you'll see if you open up the UDO document and go to the table of contents. It will look very much like this. So part 2 is the zoning introduction. It contains Article 3, which lists out the new UDO zoning districts, as well as other things. Part 3 of the UDO is the neighborhood zoning districts, and it has 2 articles, Articles 4 and 5, which lay out our neighborhood 1 zoning districts and our neighborhood 2 zoning districts. We'll talk more about those as we go along. Part 4 are the employment zoning districts, 4 separate articles in part 4, each with different zoning districts. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more specificity as we go forward. Part 5 are the centers zoning districts, Articles 10, 11, 12, and 13. Part 6, special purpose and overlay districts, and that is Article 14, talks about those. Part 7 is zoning uses, Article 15. And finally, Part 8 of the UDO are our general development standards, and that includes Articles 16 through 22, and you can see what are included in Part 8 of the UDO. So let's go a little bit deeper into our zoning districts. Our zoning districts are designed to reflect the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, particularly for the various place types that are being currently mapped through the policy mapping process. So we have two neighborhood place types being mapped, a neighborhood 1 and a neighborhood 2. Neighborhood 1 being the more traditional, lower density neighborhoods that make up a good portion of our city. Neighborhood 2 place types are higher density, typically multifamily types of areas. So we have zoning districts that correspond to both of those neighborhood place types on the lower part. So for the neighborhood 1 place type, we have 6 new UDO zoning districts, N1A through N1F. And most of these N1A, B, C, D, and E are comparable to some of our current residential zoning districts. And you can see on the screen what those are. So for example, a lot of people are familiar with R3 zoning, which is one of our popular current zoning districts. A lot of our city is zoned R3. After adoption of the UDO, the R3 zoning will translate to a new UDO zoning district, in this case, our N1A, which stands for Neighborhood 1A zoning district. And the N1A district will be very similar to what is in the R3 district, and on so forth down the line. So the R4, our current R4 zoning will translate to N1B, R5 to N1C, and so forth. The neighborhood 2 zoning districts, we have 3 of those, N2A, B, and C. We'll get into a little bit more about what those are on this slide. So the N1, the neighborhood 1 districts, and we just went through what those were, N1A through N1F. They will allow for single family, duplex, and triplex dwellings on all lots. Additionally, quadruplex dwellings will be allowed on arterial streets when an affordable housing unit is provided. This is implementing the adopted policy of the comprehensive plan, which expands the type of dwellings that would be allowed in neighborhood 1 place types. So this is what the zoning will allow for the N1A through N1E. And then the N1F district will allow these dwelling types, as well as small scale and multifamily dwellings, but the N1F will only be used on arterial streets, which are busier streets than typical neighborhood streets. The N1 as well as the N2 zoning districts will also allow for certain non-residential uses, such as places of worship, schools, neighborhood commercial establishments under certain conditions, the reuse of existing neighborhood commercial establishments. I want to make that clear. So that's generally what the neighborhood 1 zoning districts are all about. The neighborhood 2 districts are intended to accommodate moderate to high density residential, multifamily, townhomes, and so forth. They increase in intensity from N2A all the way up to N2C. So the N2A are typically more townhome and lower density multifamily, and the N2C are higher density. From the neighborhood zoning districts, we'll move to the employment zoning districts, which is found in part 4 of the UDO. And again, we are aligning the zoning with the place types that are being mapped. So we have 4 employment place types being mapped: commercial, campus, manufacturing and logistics, and light industrial or light industrial mixed use. So just going across from left to right, for the commercial place types, we've got 2 new UDO districts, CG, general commercial, and CR, regional commercial. We have 3 zoning districts for the campus place types: institutional campus 1 and 2, and office flex campus. For the manufacturing and logistics place types, we have 2 districts, ML1 and ML2. Those are kind of the equivalent of our current I1 and I2. And then the light industrial mixed use, we have 1 new zoning district, IMU, the innovation mixed use. So here's a little bit more about each of those districts. And there are a lot of words on this slide. I won't read them all. This will be available for you to come back at your leisure and go through. But generally speaking, the commercial districts, the CG is intended to accommodate general commercial development. And the CR, the regional commercial district, is intended for large scale or regionally significant commercial uses. The campus districts, the institutional campus I1 and I2, are large scale institutional campuses. They could be government, educational, like schools, medical, like hospitals, that type of campus. The difference being that IC1 is a more suburban, lower density site design, and IC2 is more urban and typically taller buildings, a better pedestrian environment than the IC1. And finally, our OFC Office Flex campus is intended for large-scale office and research campuses. Manufacturing and logistics, this is kind of our new way of saying industrial, but it kind of expands on just industrial. So the ML1 is intended to accommodate warehouse distribution and light industrial uses, whereas ML2 is the more traditional industrial, heavy industrial, if you will. These uses may, rather, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to forward. These uses may be have external impacts like noise or smoke or dust or things like that. So a heavier industrial use. And finally, the Innovation Mixed Use District. This is a new concept for us, but this district and this place type would typically be used in areas that were once industrial, but are now transitioning from industrial to maybe a broader mix of uses that may include light industrial, but also could include commercial, restaurants, even residential. We've got some of these areas in our city, and I think that this is a good approach to try to address these areas. And this IMU district is also designed to encourage and accommodate the adaptive reuse of some of our older existing structures. And then finally, we've got our centers zoning districts, which correspond to our 3 centers place types. Our neighborhood center has just 1 district, the NC district. Our community activity center place types, we've got 2 recommended zoning districts, CAC1 and CAC2. And for our regional activity center place types, we have 3 zoning districts recommended: the regional activity center, the Uptown Edge, and the Uptown Core. And we also have our transit-oriented development districts. There are 4 of those. We don't have a specific place type mapped out for TOD, but the TOD districts could be used in any of these center place types if they are in close proximity to transit, such as light rail or the streetcar. So a little deeper on these employment zoning districts. The NC district is intended to support a pedestrian-friendly mixed-use neighborhood environment with access to daily shopping needs within walking distance of nearby residential neighborhoods. Our community activity center districts 1 and 2 are CAC1 are for centers that are transitioning from today, maybe a little bit more auto-oriented, that are transitioning to a more walkable center. CAC2 are for those centers that are already fairly walkable and well-connected. Our 3 regional activity center districts, the RAC is intended to accommodate major employment locations, cultural destinations, or mixed-use development. The Uptown Edge district would be used around the edges of Uptown to transition from the high density intensity of Uptown to adjacent neighborhoods. And then finally, our UC Uptown Core is for our center city. And then, as I mentioned before, we have 4 different TOD districts, and they vary in intensity and standards according to the type of station that they're near and whether or not they're close to the station or transitioning to adjacent neighborhoods. So those are the zoning districts that we're recommending. Each of those zoning districts will have a set of standards that are specific to that zoning district. And those standards could be some or all of these, and not all zoning districts will have standards for all of these elements, but some will not. Some of these are in the actual zoning ordinance, others are in the general development standards, but they are all part of the zoning section of the UDO. So for example, lot standards, which covers, the minimum lot area, the lot width, the percentage of the lot that can be covered by a building. We have building siting standards. They include setbacks, build to zones, We have building height requirements. We're all familiar, I think, with maximum building heights, but in some districts we have minimum building height requirements. And in some districts, you're able to exceed the maximum building height of the district with bonus points, which we're currently using in our TOD districts, but we've expanded that bonus system to other districts in the UDO. We've got standards for building articulation that talk about the building length, blank wall areas, minimum ground floor heights, spacing of entries. We have transparency requirements for not only the ground floor, but upper floors. We've got building design requirements in different zoning districts. Open space requirements for almost all zoning districts will have some form of open space requirement. Parking. And in the UDO, we not only have standards for minimum parking, but in some districts, there will be parking maximums. In some districts, there will be no minimum parking requirements. We also have bicycle parking that's required in most zoning districts. And this section also talks about the design of parking lots and parking structures. Another section on loading and service, another on landscaping and screening, and finally, some requirements for signs, which cover all zoning districts. So what happens to the current zoning after the UDO is adopted? The current zoning districts will translate, and that's the term that we're using, the translation. And you can find this table in Article 3.2 of the UDO, but I've put it on this slide so that you can take a look at it. On the left-hand side of these tables in the light gray area, you can see our existing conventional zoning districts. And right now we're only talking about conventional districts. And what I mean by that is that we have some zoning districts that are conditional or optional. You might be familiar with that. You might have seen or heard of, for example, a MUD O district, which is a fairly common district in some parts of Charlotte, or a MUD CD. If a zoning district has got a CD, that stands for conditional, or an O, that stands for optional, that means that those zoning districts have gone through a public hearing process. They typically have a very specific site plan associated with them. Those are conditional districts. We are not translating those at the present time. We are only talking about the conventional zoning districts, the ones without a conditional plan attached to them. So the zoning district translation table will show you, if I have, for example, B1 zoning, which is the first one in this table today, when the UDO is adopted, my B1 zoning will become CG, general commercial. If we go over to the next set of columns in the middle, if I have R3 zoning today, when the UDO is adopted, my zoning will change from R3 to N1A. So I hope that gives you an idea. Yes, we've had a question, will my zoning change after the UDO is adopted? And the answer is probably yes, unless your zoning is a conditional district, it will change to one of the new UDO zoning districts. We also have in Article 14, some overlay and special purpose districts. Some of these we have today. Some of them are new concepts in the UDO. So for example, historic district overlay, we've got that today. We've got 7 or 8 local historic districts. And so we're going to keep those. But the next 3 overlay districts on that top line are new concepts in the UDO: cottage court overlay, a neighborhood character overlay district, and a residential infill overlay district. Those are all new. We're not going to get into a lot of detail about those today. And then the districts on the second line are manufactured home overlay, manufactured home park, and airport noise. Those are all districts that we have currently. We're carrying over to the UDO. So I'd like to talk about uses now, which are in Part 7, specifically in Article 15. So Part 7 includes a master use matrix, very similar to the one that we have in our current ordinance. which shows which uses are permitted and under which conditions in each zoning district that we have. This also, Article 15 also includes our use definitions, our prescribed conditions, because certain uses are only allowed if certain conditions are met. We call those prescribed conditions. And I've put a sample of that, just kind of a little piece of that use matrix here, and I'll walk you through how to use it. So you can see that there are several, all of the uses are listed down the left-hand side. And this is not by any means all of the uses in the UDO. This is only a sample, a small sampling of uses. These all happen to be commercial uses. And then across the top, you can see the zoning districts. It starts with ML1, ML2, IMU. It goes across. These are not all of the zoning districts. They're only the ones that will fit in this little example that we're using. So for all of the uses on the left-hand side, if you read across, you can see various letters or shading for each of the zoning districts. So let's walk through what some of those might be. And I'm going to point to the little text on the bottom and the circles and the arrows so we can walk through. So let's take that first one, the C in this cell. So you can see on the left-hand side, the use is a raceway or a drag strip. We don't have a lot of these, but if somebody wanted to come to us and say, I want to put a drag strip in the city of Charlotte, where can I do that? You can see that under the ML2 district, which is kind of our heavy industrial district, there's a letter C. It says that you can do a raceway or a drag strip in that district, but it has to be with a conditional zoning. So that's what that C means. We don't have too many of those. The next example is an X. So here in our example, looking at the uses on the left-hand side, medical dental office, and we'll go across to that X that's circled. That's in the CAC1 district, our community activity center. The X means that you can do that use in the zoning district. So if all you see at an X, that X is allowed, that use is allowed in all of those zoning districts that have the X. Our next example is the PC, the prescribed conditions. So in this particular case, we're looking at the outdoor market use, and we'll read across, and in our UE district up at the top, we can see that where those two meet, we have a PC, and that means that you can do an outdoor market in the UE district with prescribed conditions. And then finally, all of those cells that are shaded in gray simply means that you can't do that particular use in that district. And the example that I've circled here is a gas station. So if you look at the use on the left-hand side, gas stations, which is about the 5th row down, read across, you can see where that's allowed in certain districts with prescribed conditions, but in other districts, it is not permitted, including our TOD districts. So that's how you use the use table. The ones you'll find in the UDO are much larger than this example. They've got all of our various uses and all of our zoning districts. So that kind of concludes the walkthrough of the zoning section of the UDO. But I'd like to talk about how you can stay engaged and how you can make comments on the first draft of the UDO. So we did release the first draft in October. We have been going through our community engagement process, and this will continue through early January. You can provide your comments and feedback to us through January 14th, which is a little over a month away. And finally, the address of our UDO website is charlotteudo.org. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to go there. That's really the first place you should go to stay involved, get involved. We're currently in a series of virtual conversations. This is the second one that we've had. We had our first one last week that covered it was a general overview of the UDO. Each of these are dedicated to a specific topic or section of the UDO. We're currently doing the zoning district overview. And then we've got another of these virtual conversations on Thursday where we will talk about trees. And then you can see what the rest of these are. So I encourage you to either snap a picture of this slide, go to the UDO website where you can find the same schedule, and see which of these future virtual conversations you might be interested in attending. I'll mention that we have the same presentation, the same conversation twice on each of these days, once at noon, and we've had that already, obviously today, and once at 6 p.m. They're all 1 hour long. You do need to register to get the Zoom link to join the conversation, which you can do online. You can register online, or you can take a picture of the QR code in the upper part of the brochure. That'll take you to a place where you can also register. So I encourage you and urge you, if you're interested in any of these topics that you see on the screen and want to get into it a little more deeply, to go ahead and get registered for those sessions while you're thinking about it. The UDO website, when you first go to our UDO website at charlotteudo.org, you will see a big orange box that says now available Unified Development Ordinance. If you click on that, you will be able to either download the full UDO or read it by section in smaller pieces. This is also where you can go to enter your comments, questions, and feedback. I urge you to use the online platform to provide us with your feedback. Don't send us a text or an email or a phone call, because we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to track your comments and feedback that way. But if you use our online platform, we have a record of it. We're going to share it with the community so that everybody can see the comments and questions that have been provided to us. And when we provide our responses, they will also go on our website so that the community will be able to see not only the questions and comments that we've received, but how we have responded to those. So if you don't use that online platform, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to address your comment or your feedback. Finally, the UDO is a pretty big document. It's a little over 600 pages. It's a lot to digest. So to make it a little easier, we have developed a reference guide, which is only 26 pages long, and it's basically a Cliff Notes for the UDO. It will walk you through each of the articles in the UDO, tell you what is in each one, and give you some of the highlights and what you need to know about that. It's also available starting at our website. So when you go to our homepage, you'll see the menu bar across the top, and there is a tab for helpful resources. Expand that tab, and the first thing you come to will be the reference guide. And so click that, and you will open up our 26-page reference guide. So we think that that will be a good place for you to start if you haven't dug into the UDO yet. So I'm going to stop at that point, and I haven't been able to read the chat that's coming in because I've been narrating my slides. So I'm going to open it up for our team to talk about some of the comments and see if we need to have more conversation on any of these. So I will just turn it over to anybody on our team who wants to jump in. Are we caught up?
I think we just caught up with that last answer.
Okay.
Pretty sure each of these have been answered.
They have been. If anyone has any questions about what's been answered or additional questions, we would be glad to get this, and we can give everyone who is probably, a lot of people are probably listening, Alan, to what you were saying, a chance to read through the chat as well for maybe a minute or two. Also, if anyone wants to ask a question that they think is a little bit challenging to put in chat, you can raise your hand and Alan will call on you.
Hmm. Yeah, if anybody else sees a hand being raised, just call my attention to it because I don't see any, and that's okay.
You do have one person, Frederick Lowry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I tried to type it, but it didn't come in correctly.
Oh,
No,
worries.
go ahead, Frederick.
Yeah, so previously an R8 designation allowed you to build 8 units or per acre. Translating that to a N1D where it says, I think it mentioned where you can build up quadruplex dwellings. If it's an acre, is that going to allow like up to 2 quadruplexes, or is it going to do 1 quadruplex? How does that translate from the R8 to the N1D based on like a per acre density?
Yeah, the UDO doesn't have density standards the way the current residential districts have. So we don't have a X number of units per acre. And we control density by either minimum lot sizes, and they're different for each of those N1 districts, and by the types of dwellings that you can build on the lot. So you mentioned quadruplex. You can only build a quadruplex in those N1 districts if your lot is on an arterial. And what I mean by arterial are the larger streets, typically the 4-lane higher speed, not the slow speed neighborhood streets. So if you're in the middle of a neighborhood, you can't build a quadruplex. If your lot is in an N1 place type and has N1 zoning district attached to it, and you're on an arterial street, you could build a quadruplex. The caveat is that the fourth unit, one of the units in the quadruplex has got to be set aside for affordable housing. So there are a very limited number of circumstances where you could build a quadruplex in one of those neighborhood 1 zoning districts. On the other hand, you could build a single family, a duplex, or a triplex on any lot in the N1 zoning districts if it will fit on the lot. You still have to follow all of the other requirements for that zoning district, such as you've got to meet your setbacks, your building height limitations, your maximum building coverage, parking requirements. So you have to make it fit on the lot. Not sure if I completely answered your question. Please jump back in if I need to follow up.
That was helpful. I guess in the document, it breaks it down as far as the amount of units you can build per lot size. I guess, is that how it's, because you said it's no longer a density, but it gives you guidelines per lot size of what you can build based on the N1 designation. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. And N1, for example, and I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but the N1A district has a minimum lot size of, what, Chris, is it 10,000 square feet?
10,000.
10,000.
Yeah,
That Frederick is interested in is 4,000 square feet.
4,000 square feet. So that's the minimum lot size. And your lot could be larger than that, but it has to be at least 4,000 square feet. But if you have that lot, if your zoning is now N1D, you could put a single family, a duplex or a triplex on that lot if you can meet all of the other standards, like your front setback, your side setbacks, rear yard setbacks, maximum building height, maximum lot coverage, meeting whatever parking requirements may be in place for you. So it's not it's not just anything, you may not be able to fit a duplex or a triplex on every lot.
Got it. Okay, that's useful. But it sounds like you could subdivide it and meet that minimum lot requirement and build per that N1D that will allow whether it's a duplex, triplex, or single family.
As long as the lot was, met the requirements of the district, I suppose so.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, Alan, how's it going? It's Miles. Quick question. It looks as if the TOD districts, for the most part, are going to remain the same. I know we talked about some minor tweaks here and there, but that's pretty much the case, though, right? Pretty consistent.
Yes, we haven't made too many changes to the TOD districts. And for those of you who are here, may not be familiar with the TOD districts, we did a pretty substantial revision to our TOD districts in 2019. So they were kind of our model for what the rest of the zoning districts in the UDO would look like. So we've been using our new TOD districts for a couple of years now. And now that we are putting the UDO out, we're incorporating the new TOD districts into the UDO. It's Article 13. We have not made any significant changes to those districts since they were adopted a couple of years ago. Laura, correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I don't think we have.
I was going to say, Alan, minor changes, adjustments as we've learned some things, but no, not major changes. Alan, we also have a question I think we haven't answered in the chat from Betty about wanting a little bit more information on how to apply for the neighborhood character. I know, Arista, you had put some information in the chat. If you could go over that, and we can expand upon that as well. But if you'll just mention initially how that process works, then we can talk about that some more.
Okay. And just for everybody's kind of edification, when you take a look, it's in Article 14, Section 14.2, that talks about the neighborhood character. And just as kind of a brief overview, the neighborhood character overlay is a way to create a kind of set of regulations that lay on top of an N1 district, the N1A through the N1F, that may put additional controls on top of things like lot area, lot frontage, the setbacks, the building coverage, some of the parking. And so really kind of regulating kind of the development pattern that exists in that neighborhood. So really kind of that's the intent of the district, to add this additional layer of regulation. The process for that is, as I kind of laid out in the chat, is first, it may be initiated in one of two ways. Property owners within a certain geographic area, and I encourage you to read that section for more detail, can get together and essentially request that it be applied there, or it can be done by a majority vote of the council. The planning director would determine that there's eligibility for designation as this neighborhood character overlay, and notify the applicants, hold a public informational meeting, and then really kind of talk through what's going to happen there. A neighborhood character plan is then created. So again, encourage you to jump into Article 14, because there's a lot of detail here about how this works, but generally working staff will put together, using those criteria that I talked about that look at the development aspects, put together a neighborhood character plan, which again goes through a public information meeting, and then comes through as a petition for a map amendment. So it uses essentially the zoning, it functions as an overlay. So it's a zoning map amendment that would go through that process like other rezonings would go through. So hopefully that kind of answers a little bit more about the process question there.
Thank you, Arista.
And Frederick, I saw your question about the lot standards, and I'm going to just take the liberty of sharing my screen just so you can see what those look like in the district. And these happen to be the neighborhood 1 zoning districts, but this is Article 4, and you can see the lot standards. It has a diagram and also a table of the lot standards, the lot area standards. So you can see the zoning districts across the top, N1A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then you can see the minimum lot area for residential, a separate, different minimum lot area for non-residential uses, minimum lot widths for both residential and non-residential, and then the maximum building coverage. So you'll see tables like this in all of our zoning districts. This is just, I think, the example that you'd be most interested in to see what those look like. So you will find that just for your information on page 4-2. That's in Article 4, page 2 of the UDO.
Thanks, that was very helpful.
Okay, good. We're getting close to the end of our hour and not seeing any hands raised or additional questions coming in. I'd like to thank you on behalf of our UDO team for joining us tonight for this virtual conversation. I hope you found it useful, and I encourage you to sign up for our upcoming virtual conversations for those areas and topics that you might be interested in. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Before we end, and if folks may jump off, but we do have a question from Frederick about accessory dwelling units. And yes, they are addressed as a use with prescribed conditions. And you can find that also in the UDO draft.
Yep. And
the conditions are a little less stringent than our current conditions, as we really want to encourage this housing type. So this will be under the accessory uses, listed under the accessory uses in the UDO.
Yep, Article 15. Thank you, Laura. Oh.